Hello, I'm Professor David Peden from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. It is my pleasure to provide this testimonial for the online webinar focused on climate change, a global challenge, and impact on allergic diseases. I've spent the bulk of my career studying the impact of air pollution on asthma and allergic diseases, as well as other systemic inflammatory diseases and conditions. What I can tell you is that exposure to ozone, exposure to particulate matter, exposure to other air pollutants can result in acute exacerbations of asthma, oftentimes delayed by 1 or 2 days, because of the need for increased inflammation of the airway to be promulgated, and the result in increased airway reactivity and the other components of acute asthma that results in disease exacerbation. Likewise, acute exposure to some of these air pollutants will result in worsenings of COPD, will also cause systemic inflammation, which is also the domain of allergy and immunology. And that results in a number of adverse outcomes, primarily of cardiovascular origin. Indeed, for particulate air pollution, oftentimes it's the cardiovascular outcomes that cause even more morbidity than that occurs with asthma and allergic rhinitis. But when one extrapolates the impact of air pollution into the overall climate change situation, what becomes increasingly clear is that we are at a tipping point where the use of fossil fuels results in increased air pollution, and that increased air pollution, which includes greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, results in warming of the atmosphere. The warming of the atmosphere causes atmospheric changes and changes in climate and local weather, such that areas of the world are hotter, many areas flood, humidity. There's drought in some areas, but there's markedly increased humidity in other areas. And where flooding and humidity are increased, we see a marked increase in production of allergens, many of which are moisture sensitive. This is especially true for mold. This is especially true for house dust mites. But additionally, with increase in CO2, many plants respond to that stressor by developing more pollen and developing more allergenic proteins within each pollen grain. So with increased climate change and with the increased changes in the atmosphere, what we see is both increased potential for indoor and outdoor allergens, longer allergen seasons, a prolonged exposure to things to allergens that people are sensitized to. And that results in marked increase in frequency and severity of allergic disease, all the way from allergic rhinitis, which certainly impacts lifestyles, to exacerbations of asthma. And when extrapolated into systemic inflammation, one sees cardiovascular injury as well. As a specialty, it is incumbent upon us to really address this issue. We need to identify ways that patients can help themselves. Part of that is with dehumidification of their houses. Part of that is by reducing use of fossil fuels within the home so that indoor air pollutants are less of an issue. But beyond that, and more systematically, what we'll need to do is to bring our voice to regulators so that there will be coordinated, marked improvements in the regulations that impact the use of fossil fuels, that impact land use, that impact forestation policies, because all of these things contribute to increased climate. By clear-cutting forests and by forest fires, we have marked, not only do we have the direct pollution resulting from those, but we reduce the ability of forests to take up the CO2 and to minimize the impact of fossil fuel use elsewhere that the world experiences. In my experience, I've been able to participate in advising regulatory groups in my country at the state and the federal level, such that there are significant changes in air pollution laws and an approach to climate change that, while not uniform and can vary from year to year, has made a significant impact on human health over the past 3 years. I urge all of us as allergists and immunologists to beseech our local and national governmental officials to take seriously the impact of fossil fuel use, modes of transport, and other industrial sources of air pollution, so that we have a chance to not get to the 1.5 degree Celsius increase in temperature that many believe will be the tipping point, where we will have permanent changes in climate with a resultant injury to our patients. With those comments, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I wish you the best of times during this webinar. Thank you, and have a great remainder of your session.